you said something that I thought was really interesting, which was that the moment that you shared with one of the partners that you were already, or you were going to connect sexually with one of the other men, and that man said, yeah, I would love to do that with other women. It actually triggered this part of you. Then wait a second.
This is the Deep Dive with Adam Roa.
What up, deep divers? Thank you for tuning in for another episode of the Deep Dive podcast. You know me, I'm Adam Roa. I am your host, and I have Allie McPhee in the house. Allie is a little Lemurian priestess I met on the beach in Tulum and got to visit out in Kauai, and is someone who truly embodies a way of living through devotion and faith and prayer and joy. And that is, as someone who's battled through so much shadow and trauma and depression and glass half empty vibes for so much of my life, and was an atheist and all of these things, to meet someone like Allie can be incredibly triggering and can also be incredibly inspiring. And so I have so much appreciation for people who have found a way to see the joy and the beauty in life all the time. And Allie is someone that supports so many people through their own process of discovering the joy in life, and primarily working with women, which is great because the question that we have today is whether or not monogamy was designed for insecure people. And that is one where I love that this is between me and a woman. And so we can have this conversation, and who knows where it's going to go. But Allie, first and foremost, I want to say thank you for joining me on the Deep Dive podcast.
Thank you, Adam. It's such an honor to be here. And I just want to share that this podcast also has always felt triggering for me too, every time I listen to it. And this question itself is triggering today. And I'm just excited to explore it and see what we uncover.
Yes. I love that this podcast consistently triggers you. Amazing. We remember, like, trigger just means that it's bringing something up within ourselves that to be looked at. Like, what is that? What is causing that? And so it sounds like you have a lot of stuff to be looked at, Allie, deep down. That's what that I make that mean, because this podcast is perfect. And, yeah. And also I want to mention that I'm such a huge fan of your work and what you do, that you are coming into my Create community to teach on relationships and sexuality, along with Chelsea Jo Huntsman, who was just on this podcast as well. And so, for those of you by the end of this podcast are just as big a fan of Allie as I am, then you will have an opportunity to learn from her inside the Create community as she is teaching in the first 9-week cycle that we have going. So make sure you head over to thecreatecommunity.com to find out more about that. There's some links in the show notes. So anyway, Allie, why don't we start first by what we call vetting you. And why don't you give people just like a little bit of a background of what it is that you do and why this topic is so interesting to you?
Absolutely. Thanks, Adam. So I'm a womb priestess, a women's health educator, a coach, and I have an online academy called Juicy Feminine Leadership Academy. And in this academy, it's all about the relationship that we have with ourself, our creativity, our fertility in the menstrual cycle, and our sexuality. And one of the big topics that always comes up is around intimacy and relationships. And communication is so, so important. And this topic that we are diving in today, I feel like a huge edge in this realm is around our ability to communicate our needs to another human and be able to hear their needs, and to be able to just create an agreement around like boundaries and honoring each other and trust and meeting our own edges. And so this is the work that I find that a lot of women are desiring, and the work that I do. And so that's why you and I have been having conversations around this topic ourselves. And that's when it sparked, like, why don't we bring this into the deep dive? So just honored to be here and share more.
Yeah. Thank you for being here. And this is an interesting topic. You know, what I know about you is that your parents have been in a long-term monogamous relationship for how long now?
As of yesterday, 38 years.
Ooh, 38 years of marriage. I believe my parents are on 44 years of marriage. And so we both come from backgrounds of seeing our parental figures in monogamous relationships. And I'm not sure your background. Have you explored alternatives to monogamy? Have you personally done any polyamorous or open relating or anything like that?
Okay, so we're just jumping into it, right?
This is a deep dive. There's no like 1 foot in dive. That's not a dive.
All right, I'm jumping in. So yeah, as you had mentioned, we both come from backgrounds where there's monogamy. And in fact, both sides of my family, mom and dad's side, pretty much everyone is still married. My grandparents have been married over 60 years. And so I've had a very clear foundation from my childhood of what it looks like for there to be long-term partnership. And in fact, I feel very blessed. All of them are still in love too, which is not always the case. Sometimes you see married couples who've been with each other a long time and are constantly fighting or unhappy. So I've had a very beautiful, I would say, just experience throughout childhood. And as I would say, woke onto my spiritual path back in 2011, back in 2012, and meditation, yoga, spirituality, new age concepts, all the things started to become my reality. I noticed a lot of my mentors who were women, elders, entrepreneurs, a lot of them were divorced and a lot of them were not in long-term relationships. And so there was a lot of confusion within myself as I started to bud onto my spiritual path, because another thing I want to mention with my family dynamics growing up, all of them are Catholic or Protestant. And so there was this real, like, here's the tradition, you meet each other, go on the dates, meet the family, get engaged, get married in a church till death do us part in front of the priest, everyone witnesses. Then you get the house and you have the children and you plan out your life, right? Like very traditional step by step with like God as the foundation. And so as I'm exploring this like new spirituality, the new earth, I'm finding that there are not a lot of mentors that I had that had these long-term relationships. And so it created an inner dialogue within myself that felt very conflicting. And at the time, I was in a long-term relationship. That relationship itself, it felt very much like we were almost married. I mean, we were engaged at one point. We owned a house together. We were together almost 7 years. And eventually that relationship did end. And so at the ending of that relationship, it brought up so many of these questions around like, what is till death do us part? What does that really mean? What does monogamy mean? What is monogamish? What does it look like to explore polyamory? So when this relationship ended, a lot was on the table for me to explore around my sexuality and what I wanted. Because in so many ways, I feel like I was just kind of following the template of what I was given to my elders: go to college, meet my boyfriend, like get engaged, plan for marriage and family. And, I was 27 when we broke up. And so now everything suddenly was changed. And so I finally had this space to explore what it would look like to potentially have an unconventional relationship. And that brought me down the journey of Tantra. It brought me into Tantra festivals. It introduced me to cuddle parties, play parties, polyamory. I had a lot of friends that were deep in polyamory and learning from them. So I did explore, to answer your question, I did explore the realms of polyamory for a little while and baby steps, I would say. And it got really complicated. So I'm going to leave it at that for a moment. I'm going to take a pause because that was a lot. And I know you too, like, come from monogamous roots. So I'm a bit curious to hear more about your story too, Adam.
Yeah, I thank you for sharing my long-term. I always grew up. I mean, I grew up wanting to have a high school sweetheart that, like, I wanted the high school love that became whatever. I never wanted to date. It wasn't ever a thing. I wanted to find love from the very beginning. I've always been a hopeless romantic, or there's probably a more conscious way, a hopeful romantic, or whatever the new way of saying it actually is. And, I met a woman when I was 23, turning 24, and we were together for almost 10 years. And it was a monogamous relationship as we got further into kind of the new age spiritual community, specifically when we moved to Encinitas, California. That was the first time I'd ever been in a cuddle puddle. And I remember this experience of laying there, and I'm in this cuddle puddle, and this is my first time, and I have my arm around my person, my girlfriend at the time, and I feel this like rubbing on my arm, and I know it's not her rubbing my arm, and I'm like, oh, that feels really nice. And then I look over, and it's this dude Ryan that I had just met, and I really like this dude Ryan, but I was like, this dude is rubbing my arm right now, and I got really uncomfortable and I contracted. And then I thought, how interesting that on a sensation level, I was like, that feels actually just pleasant. It's not sexual. It's actually just nice. And the moment that I find that it's a guy, now I've contracted, but he's not gay, and I know he's not hitting on me. Where's that coming from? And so that was the initiation into a huge examination of what my beliefs were around sexuality and relationships and that sort of thing. And since then I've in that relationship, we explored things like bringing a woman into the relationship, not as more like a muse and dating another woman. And we never really went down there, but we were like exploring it. We had a conversation with a woman about it and that sort of thing, as opposed to, it was never I want to date other people, you want to date other people. It was more like, what in our monogamous relationship, what are the ways in which we can push the boundaries? And so we went to like play party together, and that was triggering as hell, and just so much stuff, but it was always together as a unit, which I consider to be a monogamous unit that we were kind of navigating as. And then, have in my next relationship, that was an open relationship to some degree, where, there was primary partnership, but I traveled all the time. And so we had agreements like, if you connect sexually with someone else, you get to tell the other person within like 48 hours, not a let it linger thing, but very quickly. And I found that to be very interesting, because what it did more than anything was create this extra filter, where for a lot of people, it's, let me just go and I can hook up with whoever I want and just do that. And which I know some people in open relationships have that freedom. But because there was a very specific 48 hours, tell the person if you do any of these things, and they were like, it was specific, it created is that worth it? Is this connection that I'm feeling with this person, is it purely this sexual attraction and it's not worth having that conversation? Or is this something that I would stand behind and be willing to tell my partner, hey, this happened, and now we get to deal with that? And so it was interesting to see how that impacted me and the way I operated in the world and all of that. And so I've explored in a variety of ways. One thing that popped up for me while you were sharing your story is you spoke to exploring polyamory, and what you said was, really diving into your sexuality. And so you did, and that's something that is interesting, because polyamory to me is it's not even primarily, for me, from my vantage point, primarily about sexuality even. And I think a lot of people look at polyamory primarily through the lens of the ability to sleep with other people sexually. And what I found with polyamory is, specifically polyamory is about having multiple relationships. And the idea that a lot of men have of like, oh, how great it would be to have a polyamorous relationship where I could have 3 or 4 different women. And what I say to them is, listen, those are 3 full relationships. They're not actually like 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. You are developing 3 relationships. It's different than dating. Mm-hmm. It's actually 3 relationships. And so the energy that goes into that, it's a lot. And so anyway, I'm curious for you if polyamory and your exploration into that was something that was primarily sexual.
This is an awesome question. And there's a lot that's coming up for me around all of this right now. And even with what you just spoke to and being in a relationship dynamic and exploring monogamish, I would call it. So I was, after this relationship, the 7-year relationship, and I completed, I was exploring my sexuality in a whole new way. In many ways, I would say that relationship itself was very fixed in the way that we related sexually, like how we would go to make love, what it was always like, the same positions. It was very monotonous. And coming out of this relationship, it was like a complete break, a new paradigm opening. And it was just me and myself, not having to check in with anyone, not having to just fall into old patterns. And so this was a big time of sexual awakening for me. And also, I want to mention there were 2 things that happened during this time when I started to explore polyamory. The first was I married myself on the beach in Thailand. And I told myself I could be in a relationship with somebody else, but that's a polyamorous relationship because I'm my primary partner no matter what. And I will always check in with myself. And this self-marriage actually represented a commitment to know myself in all ways on deeper levels, to understand all my inner archetypes, my protector, provider, my nurturer, my inner child, my inner best friend, my counselor. I wanted to know myself in all my ways, including how to be my own lover instead of relation to somebody else, right? Because we start to learn about sexuality and oftentimes it's through sexual experiences with other people. I wanted to know what that felt like within relationship to myself. And it's when I started to explore Tantra and spirituality within sexuality. And so that was the first thing. And then the second thing is I actually swore to celibacy for at least a year. And that turned into 2.5 years. And so I felt like I had created this boundary with myself that allowed some sort of, I would say, safety. It felt like I had a sense of safety because of this boundary or agreement with myself. We talk about polyamory, there's the agreements that are made in the relationship to create a sense of safety and trust. And I had...
Sorry to interrupt you, but for clarity, was the celibacy, because that means different things to different people. Is it just sex or was it sexual energy? Was it sexual touch? Like how deep of a celibacy are you talking about?
Yeah. So the first year it was no sex, still running sexual energy and sexual touch and kissing. And then the second year, actually, there was no kissing. It was like a whole year of complete celibacy, but me exploring with myself. So it's not like I didn't have pleasure and orgasm. That was just kept between me and myself, which was not something I had planned. It just developed into that. And, but yeah, because of that, in that first year, that's actually when I started to be invited to Tantra festivals and these cuddle parties and these play parties. So going to these events, I already had a very clear boundary of like how much I was willing to engage with people. Like there was the cuddle tent at night. And then there was like the play party, the red tent. And so I didn't even go into the other tent because I was like, all right, that's not actually where I'm at right now. I'm just wanting to learn what it feels like to connect with myself and open my, I guess, strict boundaries a little bit to see what it feels like to connect with somebody else through intimate touch, through sexual touch, whether it's a man or a woman, somebody I'm not even attracted to. What does it look like to just feel safe and feel open? And that, yeah, this journey was pretty profound for me because going back to what I was originally stating around my family having monogamous roots and seeing, as I woke, if you want to call it, onto the spiritual journey and seeing so many spiritual mentors, elders of mine, not in long-term relationship, there became this belief that I had for a period of time that was that polyamory and open relating was the more evolved form of relationships, that monogamy was a thing of the past and it was a thing for people of the old paradigm who were very strict in religion and didn't know how to move past their own comfort zone. And I started to view monogamy as like a way to create a safe container that creates momentum, creates family, but within that container, it can become very rigid and close you down to exploring triggers, right? We started this conversation off with triggers to explore things that would make you feel unsafe, that would question your way of existing in the world. And so I started to view like monogamy as less evolved, polyamory as more evolved. I don't anymore. I think that, both are a beautiful expression and we all have a choice. But at the time, that was like a motivating force to really exploring what my boundaries were around my sexuality and what was past my comfort zone. And it did lead me to eventually, when I came out of that 2.5 strict year of celibacy and started to open up into dating again. That's a whole nother journey, but I got on Tinder for the first time. It was the first time I had actually settled down somewhere because I was also traveling too. And I would joke around that like my main home that I was living in, the main town I was living in, I was in a polyamorous relationship with that as my primary town and all these other towns as my secondary. But when I finally did actually settle down, I ended up wanting to date again and getting on Tinder and meeting people. And what ended up happening was I met 3 men that I was interested in. And simultaneously, I was dating all of them. But since I'm a deep person and I go deep really fast, what it ended up happening was all of these relationships just started becoming more and more deep in their own way. And because I was studying polyamory at the time, I was reading books on it, which a really great book for anyone who is curious about it. It's called More Than Two. Highly recommend that book. Because of that, would you like to add in something?
Good.
Yeah. Between that book, between the people that were surrounding me in relationships that were polyamorous and the festivals that I was going to, I started to apply these principles in that dating experience as I deepened with each of these men and let them all know, like, I'm dating this person, I'm dating this person, I'm deepening with this person, like we're deepening in these ways together. And so I had a lot of open communication with all 3 men. One of them was used to polyamory, so he was like totally fine with it. The other one was really turned off by it, but he liked me so much that he was willing to explore beyond his edges, which was really hard for him. And then the third was just like absolutely shocked, but also in awe of how I could express love deeply with 3 different people in 3 different ways all at the same time. And what ended up happening was this experience after like a month and a half, it felt like a full-time job. Because anytime I deepened with one person, it felt like I needed to communicate with the other person to just be clear. And suddenly it's like I was spending my whole days communicating. And I was like, my business was taking off in new realms. And it's like, I just can't do this. This is like too much time being spent on communication and working through things in relationship. And so I eventually just like picked one person and then fell back into that whole like monogamous roots. Like, okay, this is easy. Let's just build momentum with this one person. Let's just work out all this stuff with just one person. So that was like my journey in it. It lasted like a month and a half, but I would definitely say that it expanded my capacity to love, like to experience like growing love with 3 different people all at the same time. That was an edge for me. And to see their reactions and to hold the space for my journey and theirs, it was really, really profound. And so I really honor anyone who can hold down multiple relationships and show up differently and intimately in each of them in that specific way and still have it be sustainable and still hold down a job and still have a family. Like, to me, it's like, it's wild, and it takes a lot of trust, openness, communication, and time. And I just found that for my life and my roots, it was more challenging than I would say overall long-term rewarding for me.
And so for people who are entertaining, if you're listening to this, I imagine that there's some aspect of you that's at least curious of alternative styles of relating, and I want to, in a second here, bring us back to the actual question of, is monogamy designed for insecure people? And this is great for people to hear as we get into that question, even the ways in which we have explored very alternatives, because I think that's the piece that will get very interesting within the question. One of the things that you said was, as you would deepen with one person, you would need to communicate it to the other 2. What in that world, what is deepening with one person mean? Like, at what point is it like, oh, this is something that needs to be communicated to the other people?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, as I had mentioned, I was celibate for a long time and just exploring sexual energy with myself. So, sex means a lot to me when I'm sharing myself sexually with somebody else. That's my creative energy. That's my life force energy. I'm also very psychic, so I feel a lot. So, as these relationships continued, not just from dating to kissing, when there became that clarity that this next step was on the table to engage more physically, more sexually, I felt like that's a lot for me. And when I would move in a step further with that person, I felt like I needed to tell the other person. And maybe that's just because I didn't have an agreement with them. Or maybe that's my monogamous roots of feeling like, oh, I just did this. And like, it just brought up a lot for me. So that's where things became more challenging for me and more emotional for the other people too. I mean, one of the men I told you, he was used to polyamory. So when I told him about it, he was like, okay with it. And he was like, oh, great. Well, I would like to explore sexually with other people too. And then he's the one that I ended up dating, like after all of them. Like he and I ended up deepening. But when he said that, it actually triggered me because I was like, I don't want him exploring sexually with somebody else. Now I feel unsafe because there's like a whole nother question around mixing sexual energy. Are you using protection? Like, could they have STDs, right? Like there's a lot that needs to be communicated here for someone to feel safe and feel trust within that container. And so these things started to come up. And when I shared with the other men, like they had their own emotions around it. They had their own experiences. So it became a lot of processing around like when the intimacy was deepening with like sexual energy. And so that's where I found that it was very challenging for me and just personally not worth it.
So two things come up. First, just a real quick definitional thing. What in your mind made that polyamory versus dating?
Yeah. So what it made it in my mind seem as polyamory is that I was like committed to each of these men, going deeper with all of them and letting them know that too. And even though we were dating, it's like I desired something more potentially long-term with each of them. It wasn't just like an exploration of, yeah, we're going on dates, we're learning each other, let's see where this goes. And maybe that's just the template that I carry because again, my whole family, it's like you essentially find your beloved that you're going to have a family with, you settle down, you have your root structure, you grow babies and you see them to college and all the things. And so when I started dating again, it was like the lens of, could this be a match of like long-term partner, family, da, da, da. And I felt that with like each of them and was exploring it through that lens and wanted to commit into seeing where this would go. But it was with 3 people all at once.
So, and I think it really is a semantic thing. Like, what is the difference between dating and polyamory? I think for most people, what some people would call polyamory, other people would just be like, oh, you're just dating. And so there's an interesting aspect to that. But you said something that I thought was really interesting, which was that the moment that you shared with one of the partners that you were already, or you were going to connect sexually with one of the other men, and that man said, yeah, I would love to do that with other women. It actually triggered this part of you that, wait a second. And thus begins the question, is monogamy designed for insecure people? And the question of like that trigger is something that I think most people can relate to. Mm-hmm. Most people listening to this, maybe all people listening to this, can understand that feeling of being with someone, especially if you're in love with that person, and the idea of them having sex with someone else being a trigger. Being something that's actually triggering and challenging and brings up jealousy, brings up insecurity and all of that. And I think when we look at, oh, well, the solution to that is monogamy. You just date that one person that you're happy with. Great, amazing. And when you look at statistics on the planet today, monogamy is fading to some degree. There are less and less people who are staying in long-term committed relationships. There are more and more people who are open and or actually practicing alternative styles of relating other than monogamy. And the actual structures of monogamy that have been put in place are, to a large degree, based on a patriarchal society of like legacy and very practical aspects of ownership and family wealth and like all of these things. And so monogamy itself, it wasn't designed, like the actual institution of marriage was not designed from this, like, oh, two people love each other and they just want to commit to themselves through love for all of eternity. That's actually not why marriage and the institution of marriage was designed. And it's not the reasons why marriage in a society has actually been implemented. And so I want to separate those two things a little bit, because I do think that marriage is one aspect and it is different than monogamy. Like marriage is the legal commitment to monogamy. And so what you shared was the insecurity that came up, or the fear that came up, that I think most people can relate to in this way. And it is easier to actually say, let me just be with one person, rather than face the discomfort and the sadness and the fear and all the things of that person sleeping with somebody else. Do you feel
is it
like,
easier though?
Well, what I'm curious about is, do you feel like your insecurity, fear, those triggers played a major role in you making the decision to actually go into monogamy with that person?
Yeah. And I would say ultimately, yes. It was also my bandwidth at the time. Like my business was scaling heavily and I was working long hours. And it was right before I was about to go into a launch when I was engaging with these men. And part of that was like, I don't feel like I have the emotional capacity and the time to invest into all of this in the depth that I am right now and start to launch this next program. Like that, it just felt like my bandwidth was maxed out. So that was part of it. And then, yeah, definitely the part around the jealousy or feeling unsafe. I know a lot of people too, like worthiness can come up around this as well. So absolutely. Like when finding out the man that I would say most in connection with was like, well, great. Like, well, then I would like to also explore with other women. And that definitely brought up those triggers in me. Like, well, that's like, I don't want to have to like do what I'm doing right now, like with all these men and with the communication and the time invested. And then now this other man dating this person or this person, and now going into those realms of deeper communication with him and what's coming up for me. It just felt like my bandwidth could not hold it. And that's when I was just like, can we just date? And then we made it monogamous. And so, yeah, I would say absolutely. And I also want to speak to something that you were saying too, because I love that you brought the statistics into this and that perspective of marriage versus, lovership and monogamy. I really have come to believe that one lover can't be everything for you. And I feel like that's where a lot of the strain on relationships that are monogamous come from. Like where the strain is like you put like a man and a woman in a house together, potentially raising children, they're working, and it's just the isolated nuclear family unit. And it's like women have emotions, we have menstrual cycles, we have these highs and lows, we have specific needs. And then there's a lot of pressure with work, and to expect that your partner is going to be all of these roles for you when you need somebody at specific times is I feel is unhealthy. It's an expectation that's always going to be unmet. And so we can fall, and I know I fell into this trap of like, well, my beloved's not doing this for me, or my beloved's not showing up this way for me. And part of that self-marriage journey that I went through was to learn how to first be these roles for myself. Like, how does it really feel like to protect myself when my beloved, my ex-partner, was always the protector? How does it feel to show up as my own coach rather than first calling, him over and asking him to give me feedback on something because I'm feeling insecure? And so I feel like just in general, that concept of shifting from that, like, one person has to be your everything, and creating an openness, whether it's, you're on the poly path, or just having openness in your friendships and knowing that, there's so many ways that we can relate to people, and to not put so much pressure on one person to be everything is really, really important.
I 100% agree. And I think that I'm such a huge just believer in community. And I've just noticed the impact that having close friends around me does, and what that does for my energetic, what that does for my life. And I feel like there are things I was in when I was in my 10-year relationship. We were each other's like everything for the most part. For most of that relationship, we didn't actually develop. I personally didn't even really develop deep tribe until I was out of that relationship. We started to towards the end of the relationship. We definitely did, but we had friends. I had good friends, all of that stuff. But the feeling of belonging to a community was not something that we had, because we had each other. And I think that we took a lot of pride in that. We had business together. We led retreats together. And I think that what you've spoken to is incredibly important, which is I've learned that there are certain things that, for example, that you don't bring into the relationship. So there are certain ways, times that you're going through a process that it would serve so much more to bring it to your girlfriends or your guy friends and those support systems, or a coach or whatever, and not be reliant on everything having to be in the container of the relationship itself. Now, what's interesting is I think that when it comes to that aspect of your partner, your monogamous partner can't be everything for you. The real question, and I think at the root of where most of this goes, is can that primary partner be everything for you sexually? Like, can the container of monogamy be the everything of your sexual part of life? What do you think?
Oh my God, we're getting so juicy now. Yeah. So this question is just, I'm going to define it as best as I can in this moment in time, because I think this question is going to be ever evolving through the rest of our lives, right? Because we're constantly changing. And as we change into later years, like, my hormones are going to shift, my body is going to shift. And it's hard to predict this and say yes or no when in life we're always changing. And so what I would say right now is I don't think our one partner can be everything all the time for us sexually. And the reason why I'm saying that is because the experience of being my own lover for 2.5 years and exploring sexuality just with myself and bringing in practices like sex magic, orgasmic ritual, manifestation, and really connecting with God in these heightened states, that was an energy that was just cultivated with me and spirit. And so there's a very specific alchemy as to how I connect with my sexual energy when I'm just by myself. That's always different if I'm in lovership and engaging in sexuality in lovership. And so that experience, I can bring elements of that into a sexual relationship. And because I know myself and I'm rooted in myself, I'm still within myself. But it's a different experience when I'm doing that just with myself. And there's times that I want to be alone and self-caring in the bathtub, right? And so to me, I see that there are different parts that I connect with my own intuition and just engaging by myself sexually than with another person. So that right off the bat tells me like, no, that a partner can't be everything. One partner can't be everything for me sexually.
So then the question is, can it be the one partner and you? Because that is monogamy. And I know there are some relationships where, it's almost a stereotype, but it actually is true. There are people who, if they catch their long-term partner masturbating, they almost feel threatened by it. Like, what am I doing wrong that you wouldn't want to have sex with me, that you would want to just masturbate? And that in and of itself is I think a very speaks to the insecurity aspect. Like if you are getting insecure because your partner is self-pleasuring, there are obvious things under the surface there. It could be speaking to the parts of your relationship in which you are aware that your sexual chemistry and your sex life is not where you want it to be. And so it's bringing up the insecurities that you are not enough as a result of feeling that. Or it may be the parts of you that don't have your own relationship with yourself and your own self-pleasure. So you don't understand why they would want to do that in that way. And yet in what I would consider a monogamous relationship that has a healthy understanding of sexual energy, where the two people are connected to themselves sexually and therefore able to bring that into a sexual connection with each other, that still would fall under monogamy. And so do you feel like, is that enough?
Yeah. And so there's now a step further, right? So since I started studying Tantra, I'm in these groups, these communities, these private, intimate retreats that I either attend or I even lead. And it's very much priestess, temple of Isis. If anyone knows about that, read the Magdalene manuscript. And in these containers, like we're running sexual energy, there's physical touch. And it's really, though, about erotic innocence. It's not about connecting with each other to form a relationship. Like that's not the intention. It's to come and to explore sexual energy, to increase orgasmic energy, to heal trauma and move through blocks and move through unexpressed emotions that may be blocking heightened sexual energy. And in these retreats, whether I'm attending them or leading them, it has increased my ability to be intimate, not just with myself, but share that in a container in lovership. And so I'm sharing this because it's like when two people are in a sexual relationship and maybe they've only evolved so far, right? And then maybe their attention is elsewhere. They are taking care of their children constantly. They're at work and their work demands are huge. They're traveling all the time. If they're not investing themselves and exploring new ways of sexually connecting, it can get into that pattern like it did for me when I was like back in my long-term relationship, where we literally were having sex the same way with a vibrator every time. I was having an orgasm, but it was very like, all right, this is what we do. And then we have an orgasm this way and now we're done. And it was like, it killed the potential for magic. And so I feel that for me personally, I feel that being open to exploring sexuality with other people in a container, again, this feels safe for me, right? It feels innocent. It feels like I'm going there to heal and to learn rather than to connect and like fall in love and join into a relationship. That itself has been deeply expansive for me, so that when I am connecting in the bedroom, like there's more space for all of me and I feel more comfortable to explore. And something really profound that I found in Tantra work too is a lot of the times we might feel pain or numbness or tension when we're making love is because there's either an unexpressed emotion, there's something we didn't fully communicate and maybe we're holding back and feeling upset, or maybe there's unresolved trauma from a past sexual experience. And when we're able to instead like keep quiet and shutting that down and just like continue the sexual energy and, have the orgasm. We're just used to having the orgasm, but instead be present with what's coming up and even speaking to like, hey, I feel numb, or hey, can we pause for a second? I'm feeling pain. Can we breathe through this? Like, could you hold space for me and whatever wants to come up? I have personally found that when there's space for whatever's hidden to come to the surface when engaging with sexual energy, it's this powerful release where these emotions come up. Suddenly I'm howling or hissing or moaning or crying, and we're moving all around in different positions. And it's like this ecstatic release that turns into suddenly heightened joy, heightened ecstasy, heightened sensation. And then suddenly I'm having new orgasms in different positions in different ways. And it's like, that was unplanned. That was not like, we're headed to the bedroom. It's after the date night. Get out the vibrator, get out the lube, 10 minutes, we're done, right? It's like a whole journey. And so that's what I just want to honor too, about just like, for anyone that is interested in exploring, whether it's just sexuality or tantra or even polyamory, like any of these ways of exploring sexuality, just to be open with yourself and meet your triggers and even work through your trauma, it's a huge edge, but it leads to expansion and it leads to an understanding of the depth of yourself, which then you can bring into an intimate relationship, which can definitely heighten the passion, the orgasm energy.
So bringing it back, thank you for sharing all that. So bringing it back to the question, right? The deep dive question here of, is monogamy designed for insecure people? What I've heard you share has been that sexual energy, the movement of sexual energy and the share of sexual energy is in and of itself a very healthy thing and can be incredibly healing and will bring so much to the surface. And that in a container, so even in the container where it's not meant to create necessarily relationships, but just be a safe space to explore and share in sexual energy. If all of that is true, then what's the reason then for anyone to be in monogamy if there's simply just cutting themselves off from all of that growth that you just spoke to and shared as, hey, here's all of this that's available, and it can still be done without creating the long-term relationships with people you're having sex with, and the knowing the triggers and the fears that are associated with that, which I could speak to in a second. But what reason is there for not doing it?
What reason is there to not be in monogamy or to stay in monogamy?
What reason is there to not be exchanging your sexual energy with other people and exploring in that way? Like, what is the reason to be in monogamy if everything that you spoke to is about the growth that's available in the exchange of that energy with different people?
Well, I mean, I really do feel like this is an individual question, right? Because there's people who are monogamous. You may have a different answer than me, right? We're all so completely different.
But it sounds like they're just insecure. That's what we're getting to, the deep dive answer. And it sounds like all of you who are saying, no, I'm actually just, I know that I'm not fully fulfilled because that person can't be everything and all of this stuff, but I don't like the idea, blah, blah, blah. It's because you're insecure. Because Allie McPhee has just shared of all the growth that's available to you if you weren't so insecure.
All right. Well, I'm going to defend the monogamous person now.
Yeah, that's what I'm inviting here is like, what is the reason then to do it if you just outlined all of the growth that's available in not being monogamous? Well, what is available then? Why would someone be monogamous unless it was just to not face off with those fears?
Right. Yeah. So in monogamy, right? Like all of this growth that I'm talking about that has to do with sexual exploration and the triggers that might come up. I don't believe that this is the only container, the facet of life we can grow in. There's multiple ways we can grow in life. And we can even bring these concepts into a monogamous container, right? We don't have to explore it with other people or go to retreats. But yeah, I personally do find for myself that in order to understand something, I can't just read it in a book. Like, to have a teacher or a guide or an experience is what helps me grow. And then I can bring that back to the container. Yeah, for somebody who's monogamous, the beauty I would say about being in a monogamous relationship and not, exploring everything that I just said is the ability to create momentum just with one person, and to let that be as what's being created in the life, in terms of how two people are flowing together. And actually, Adam, I can't answer this question.
She can't defend it. She can't defend it. The truth comes out. You're all insecure, you monogamous, fear-based monogamy people. That's the truth that Allie has deep inside of her. She just doesn't want to say it. That's what we found out. Well, let me ask you this question. Do you believe that by opening the container of monogamy in some way to the exchange of sexual energy outside of the two people, do you believe that something is actually sacrificed or lost from the container?
I actually don't really believe in the word sacrifice, period. So I would like to say that I feel like everything can be a win-win situation if we choose for it to be.
So is there an aspect of, so you talked about in a monogamy, how you build momentum when you're in a monogamous container like that.
Right.
Do you believe, like, momentum being one aspect, do you believe that there is some aspect, we'll call it an opportunity cost, so to speak, whether it's sacrifice but there is something that you are choosing that will leave? There will be some sort of loss of something from the monogamous container when it's opened up in that way.
Do I feel like something could be lost? Again, I feel like this really comes down to choice. I think as we explore other interests, like, our beloved may not always be on board with that, right? And so when you're talking about in terms of could something be lost, it could be the way that the two individuals are relating in a specific time, in a specific container together. Like, there's a death and rebirth that happens as one person or two people become enlightened with a new possibility of relating. And if one person is on board and the other person's not, what could be lost is the sense of ease. However, like, if somebody's desiring to explore beyond what's easy, there's, obviously there's something that's not working there anyways, or else why would somebody want to explore? And I think that's just human nature, though. Like, we're always wanting to excel and up level and learn beyond where we're at. But I think ultimately, like, this has to do with choice, as these new concepts are being explored, as we're being expanded, like, choosing to put yourself back into deep intimacy, into communication, into date night with your beloved, so that there's presence there. There is a reestablishment of boundaries and agreements. I feel like the word choice is really important, because it could feel like there's something being lost. But then again, I don't believe that anything's sacrificed. I believe that we always have a choice to create win-win situations for each other if we choose that.
Yeah, I think that, sacrifices, but I would use the term opportunity cost, right? Like, when you're in a monogamous container, there's something that's created there. And by going outside of the container, there is something gained for sure. Like, there is definitely, you spoke to so much of what to be gained from the exploration of sexual energy with different people, and what can be gained from that, from the healing to the growth and the triggers of like, oh, let me exchange energy with someone I'm not even attracted to, and see what, and so, like, there's so much growth there. And the container over here that is in a traditional, just 100% monogamous container, the moment that that's opened up out here, something shifts about this container versus being entirely traditional. So there's an opportunity cost. And I was curious if you perceive that or are aware of that, or if in your mind there even is one, because that would have a huge impact on the belief systems that you're speaking to.
Totally. Totally. And it really does. I feel like first starts with the security you have with yourself, and which is like the foundation of the whole question we're asking today. I'm really curious to hear your perspective on this, because I know like I'm speaking from my own perspective. I'm sure there's a wide range of people in different relating ways listening to this podcast, having their own thoughts. So I'm curious to hear from Adam Roa and his deep dive.
Well, part of this for me is, I love being able to utilize this podcast to explore people who are inspiring and the way that they think. And so to hear from you and arrive at this space of being able to identify that, like for the most part, you see it as the gains that are available and not seeing anything really to be quote unquote lost or sacrificed or opportunity costed out of a monogamous relationship would be the framework of belief system that would lead someone to have the belief like you do, which is that all you monogamous people are insecure. And so because there's essentially only something to be gained and nothing to be lost from entering into that, right? Like it's just important. My point of the whole podcast is like letting people understand the frameworks of belief. And if you believe that there is only a gain and nothing to be lost, and I don't like to use the word lost, but I can't think of a better one in this. No wonder that would lead to that. So that's what I wanted to the reason why I was asking this, so people listening to this can understand, because I'm going to speak to, I'll see how much of it is from my own perspective, but I do want to kind of give heaven's advocate, just to give another perspective without necessarily it being my own. I think that let me just speak to the opportunity cost first and foremost. Like one, I understand and have experienced and also deeply believe in the power, the healing power and the growing power and the magic of sexual energy and the exchange of sexual energy. I remember for me, one of the most just mind-boggling aspects was to be in a relationship with a woman in an open-ish container. I wasn't actually dating, but I was open to what might show up. And we had that agreement, like I mentioned earlier in this podcast, around if engaged in sexual activity, you needed to communicate that within 48 hours, but it wasn't something we needed permission or to speak of ahead of time or whatever. And I had this experience where I met a woman who was a tantrika. She taught tantra and was very much in that world. And I'll spare the details of the story, but we ended up connecting and spent one beautiful night together. And I, at several times throughout the night, went, okay, let me check in on if this is progressing, is this worth it? And what I loved was that extra filter, because there was no, I wasn't drinking at the time, but for example, let me just get drunk and do this thing and then not have any consciousness around it. So it was very intentional. And every time there was a progression of where it was headed, it was like, ooh, let me check in. Let me check in. Let me check in. And then after it was done, it was absolutely beautiful. It was it was a wonderful night. And it gave me a deeper appreciation for the woman that I was dating. There was not actually a loss of, oh my God, I want to do this way more often. It was actually, this experience was amazing. And it wasn't this experience. It wasn't this connection. It wasn't this container. And so while I enjoyed it and didn't regret it, it also gave me such appreciation for the person I was dating. And so I do have the experience of, wow, I know that connecting with someone else sexually doesn't have to be a loss of love for the person I'm dating. And that was a world shifter for me. Yeah. Because I think that in monogamy itself, the fear is that if your partner sleeps with someone else, they're going to love you less. or they're going to fall out of love with you. And to have the exact opposite experience was something that just changed the whole paradigm for me. And so that's something that I want to speak to, and speak to the defense of all you monogamy people that Allie's been attacking this whole time.
You're putting words in my mouth.
Yeah, I'm just kidding. But what I want to speak to is so I have a book on Amazon called Cosmic Philosophy, and it's a channeled text. I literally don't want to go into too much. Basically, I went to Egypt, had someone give me this crazy 2-hour session activating my channel. And for the next month, I would call him up. He would take me through a 5-minute reactivation meditation on the phone. And then I would journal basically with my eyes closed. And I took a bunch of those and turned it into this book on cosmic philosophy. And there was one entry that came through me that was really powerful, which is that human beings, almost like across the board, struggle with the idea of limitation. They don't like the idea of being limited. And yet it is through limitation that we're actually able to experience basically anything. If you removed all limitation, you are now back into God consciousness, and it all just is. It's actually through the limitation, the structures, the parameter, that you're able to experience anything. For example, you can't actually experience life without the limitation of time. Time is a necessary component for us to be able to experience life. And so that is one example. And the channeling that came through me, and it's in this book, is think of a swimming pool. It's all of the water. The water is the what we would be experiencing and swimming in. It's the soup of everything of that is life. It's only the walls of the swimming pool that allow us to swim. If you remove the limitations of walls, the water goes everywhere. You can't swim. And so similarly with life, there are parameters in place that create the pool that we can swim in, time being one of those, for example. So in the limitations, so to speak, the walls, the parameters of monogamy, there are now opportunities to quote unquote swim that are not available when you remove those walls, just by the nature of how I personally view everything and existence itself. It is the limitations and the parameters that allow for certain specifics of experience. And so with monogamy specifically, thinking about, wow, someone who's been in a relationship for a while and feeling unsatisfied sexually. Okay. In the parameters of monogamy, in a fixed, traditional, married, this is the only person I will ever exchange sexual energy with now until the day I die. What that parameter has done when that belief is adopted and that person's not going into, I want to cheat or have infidelity or whatever, what ends up happening is now the conversation must be, how do I satisfy myself sexually within these parameters? And so that creates a necessity of exploration that is not one that someone who's in a polyamorous or open relationship has to necessarily go down. The question of, okay, how do I communicate to my partner? Hey, I would like to explore sexually because I would like to experience this or that, right? The exploration of that with someone who you may have developed these routines with of how you engage sexually. And it's like, well, how do I actually explore this? What does that mean? That exploration is different than the one that you go down when you explore sexually with other people. Mm-hmm. In many ways, exploring sexually with someone else is easier to meet new aspects of yourself because they're bringing a different mirror to the party. and finding those aspects within yourself, your own desires, your own edges, being able to communicate them, and then having a relationship that allows you to have that exploration. The development of that in many ways could be the very thing that strengthens your relationship in a way that you can literally navigate anything that comes up or comes across. And so you're developing a deeper relationship in communication, in pleasure, in fun, through the necessity of figuring out how to navigate sexually within these limitations, quote unquote, and parameters of a monogamous relationship. And I think that when you open it up, in many ways, you give a pressure release valve, an outlet that is easier than having to do it with the person that you're with. And so I can see the value of monogamy from that lens. And I just wanted to at least share that perspective and belief for those of you who have been offended by anything that Ali has said. And I'm just kidding. I'm giving you a hard time. But I do, for those of you who are listening, that is another perspective. However, what I will add to this, before I get your response, Ali, because I know I've been talking for a minute, what I will add to this is that most people get into a monogamous relationship, feel sexually unsatisfied and stop exploring in this way, fall into monotony, et cetera, and don't actually take it into their relationship as the opportunity to grow. That is something that most relationships people are uncomfortable. They don't know how to communicate it. They don't know how to not get triggered in that exploration, et cetera. And so what ends up happening is that monogamous relationship stalls and it gets stagnant because of those fears and those doubts and insecurities. And as a result to that, people will just say, oh, that's just kind of what happened. And then that's where infidelity can happen. That's when the idea that the only way of satisfying these needs to be opening it up or whatever. But I do want to invite in for people this understanding of what's possible if you are able to take this perspective. And I'm so grateful, Ali, that you shared your perspective on it, this other perspective going into a monogamous container, because again, what I do believe is that there is not one right way, but it will depend on the action that you take within the parameters of whatever it is that is working for you.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like you articulated that beautifully. And yeah, what I'm just hearing is that in whatever route you choose, just the openness to grow is important. And that might be just in your face more in a polyamorous relationship, but to look at the parameters that are in the monogamous relationship, the patterns, the limitations that have already been created, and to choose another belief, to have the openness to grow and bring these new concepts into these parameters, that itself is a huge growth edge and is so rewarding and can absolutely be done between two people that are in a long-term container. And yeah, I essentially also believe there's no this way or that way, right way or wrong way. I mean, I myself tend to lean towards monogamish. And it's just open for exploration. I've not entered into my long-term union. And I desire to have more of a monogamish relationship, especially when I'm a mom and you bring children into the equation. And now I'm teaching these human beings and I want like a structure. And I've seen like my mom and dad have a very clear foundation and structure as to how I was raised in and to how successful that was. So there's a lot on the table, and I just feel like we're constantly learning and growing, and fundamentally like human nature to have an openness mindset and be able to integrate new beliefs instead of staying fixed in patterns, and whatever you choose is like the ultimate underneath all of it.
Well said. And I would say that to wrap this up here, the overarching answer to the question of, is monogamy designed for insecure people? I would say
Great question, by the
way. I would say that for myself, leaving this conversation, I would say that it's not necessarily designed for insecure people, but just in general, most people are incredibly insecure, especially when it comes to sexuality and their sexual desires and their fears and doubts and insecurities around their own self-worth. I think that is a very normal thing for humans on this planet. And so therefore, monogamy is also the most normalized and promoted. For those of you who don't know, like society is built to promote monogamy. You get benefits from taxes to healthcare to family dynamic system. Like it's promoting a monogamous container. And so in many ways, you just have most people being wildly insecure around these topics and areas, and they're entering into monogamy. And therefore you have a lot of insecure people entering into monogamy, thinking that monogamy will actually be the solution to them not facing off with these things. However, the opportunity is there for the same, like, let me face off with some of my communication issues around this. Let me face off with some of my insecurities around this. Let me face off with some of my fears of not being enough for my partner. Let me face off with those things in the monogamous container. And so therefore you don't have to continue to be insecure in these areas just because you're in monogamy. It doesn't imply that, although, it is very much a part of, I think it does take a lot more courage to open it up just innately. And so you're going to find people who are maybe a little bit more less in their insecurity in open relating dynamics, because it does force you to be in some of those things. So that's what I'm taking away from this, Allie McPhee. I appreciate you. I hope that was a good synthesis for all you deep divers. Thank you for going on this deep dive with us. And, this, you can obviously see why I've invited Allie into the Create community to teach on relationships and sexuality. And Allie's class is actually about communicating through relationship taboos. And that is what she's going to be teaching in one of her classes in the Create community. Allie, why don't you let people know where they can find out more about you, what you do, follow along with your work, and just get more of your wisdom.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, again, I just want to thank you for having this conversation with me today, even prefacing at the beginning that this would be taboo just to talk about it together here live. I'm so excited to be a part of the Create community. If you want to learn more about the work that I do, I mostly hang out on Instagram, which I'm on Instagram at Modern Goddess Lifestyle. And then upcoming in August, actually August 8th through the 12th, I haven't fully announced it publicly, so you're the first to hear, but I'm hosting a free 5-day Expand and Receive challenge, expanding your capacity to receive, whether it's within intimacy, creativity, sexuality, prosperity. It's the depth of the relationship with yourself and opening your capacity to receive in your feminine flow. So anyone interested, it's for women and womb carriers, but anyone interested in that, again, you can find more about that at Modern Goddess Lifestyle on Instagram or moderngoddesslifestyle.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the time that you've taken to dive deep with me and this deep diver community. All of you deep divers, thank you for being in this conversation. It is taboo. It's hard. I know most of you are probably monogamous, and to hear certain things can be challenging, but that's what.
Wait, how do you know that? How do you know everyone that's listening to this is mostly monogamous?
Statistics. So statistically, you're most of the people here are going to be into monogamy, and I
want to hear from them. I want to hear from people after this. I want to hear their views.
100%. I want to hear from all of you. Please, share this out on social media. And my favorite way is when you actually share your thoughts. You listen to the podcast, and then you do a post or a story, and you share your thoughts about what came up for you listening to this. Make sure you tag Allie and me and the Deep Dive podcast on any of those posts so that we can see them and reshare them. And I appreciate the willingness to be in these conversations, because at the end of the day, what we arrived at, Allie and I, here is just, can you face your insecurities? Can you face the part of you that gets triggered, whether that's in a monogamous container or whether that's in the, dating polyamorous, open monogamish containers that are alternatives? And so with a statistically growing number of people who are actually exploring non-monogamy, I'm grateful to be a part of that conversation. I'm grateful to all of you who are taking the time to be a part of that conversation. And I encourage you to just keep asking the questions, keep diving deep. And once again, thank you, Allie McPhee. And all you deep divers, I want to remind you that always, you are seen, you are heard, and you are loved. Blessings, fam.